I'm Brian Fowler, president of Blind Creek Resources Limited, listed on the TSX Venture Exchange, ticker symbol BCK. Blind Creek is focused in the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and British Columbia. The company's key property is the Blend Project, one of the largest undeveloped lead-zinc-silver deposits in Western Canada, plus plans to advance the recently acquired, fully permitted historic engineer gold mine in the Atlan District of Northwestern BC. Check us out at blindcreekresources.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Don Shafer. He's the general manager of Roundhouse Radio on the FM dial in Vancouver at 98.3. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thanks, Jim. It's nice to be with you.
Roundhouse Radio I have found refreshing. It has lots of local voices talking about local issues, something that in today's world is kind of rare. Was that the whole goal of Roundhouse Radio, to try to focus on things locally? Because I'm telling you, I'm trumped out.
Yeah, I think we all are. You know, it's interesting because if you go back to the 20s and 30s, I mean, radio is very local. So what we're doing is not necessarily, new. It's just that it's a small town, very localized model. And we were very intentional about the application of the CRTC, knowing that there was a need for, more local programming, some kind of a way to engage people that lived in a particular area, like the city of Vancouver. And so we focused on pretty much local. I mean, we serve 1 million people, and we do our best to reach into every neighborhood and every community and find out what's going on in those communities, whether it's arts and culture, whether it's politics. It just doesn't matter. So it's been a really interesting revitalization, if you like, of a very old radio model.
I know a lot of applicants for new radio stations promise to do a lot of local. Then as soon as they get the first chance, they bail on that and start broadcasting the same stuff dictated out of Toronto or New York. Any chances of that happening to Roundhouse?
There's always, it's an interesting conversation because if you follow the CRTC regulations, and if you go back into the 70s and 80s as the regulations morphed, there was always a concern that all the radio stations would go to the center, that they'd all wind up doing the same thing. And in some, to some extent that has happened, but in other extents, stations that differentiate themselves and are different, whether it's classic rock or whether it's pop or whether it's news talk or whether it's, something unique like what we're doing, they do stand out from the pack. So, it's an interesting question, and we knew that when we applied for a license that it would be unlikely that the commission would want to approve another music station because there's already lots of music stations in Vancouver, so we wanted to do something different. And we modeled our application on essentially a 20s radio station model, but we also used the Vancouver Foundation report that talked about the state of the city and how nobody or very few people or groups are talking to each other. So, by being a really hometown local radio station, we seem to be able to do that. So, will it always be the same? Will it not change or morph over the years? I can't guarantee that, but certainly the initial, year and a half that we've been on the air has been very positive by what we've seen from, the feedback we're getting from, the street and from organizations and from business.
How important is that feedback to programming the radio station?
It's a great question because, we haven't been around long enough to fall into traditional ratings that most radio stations are into. So, as an old programmer, or old disc jockey and programmer, I look for what I call vital signs. And vital signs are, what kind of impact are you having on the street? What happens when you show up at a folk festival and you help the crew that are putting on the folk festival for the day? What happens when you show up at a Red Cross event or a local fundraising event for a local charity? And when you do that, over and over and over again, and when you do things like what we do on the air, you start to get some kind of a buzz or some kind of a feedback of, hey, I heard that show, or hey, I really appreciated you guys coming down and helping us at the Dragon Boat race, or that was a really cool thing you did when you showed up here. And, you know, it's the radio station's consistency of being engaged with its audience that starts to generate that kind of feedback. So whether it's phones, or whether it's the social media support, or whether it's calls to our studio, or just people coming by to say, hey, I really like what you're doing, you know, those to me are the vital signs that tell us that we're on the right track. If we weren't getting any, you know, I'd be really concerned. But, you know, having built a number of radio stations across Canada, you know, I can't tell you that I've seen anything quite as exciting about, you know, than compared to what we're doing.
So many radio stations say so-and-so in Vancouver, you're trying to put the Vancouver back into radio.
Yeah, I suppose, but, you know, it's, you know, one of my peers asked me a question when we got the license, and they said, do you think there's enough things in the city of Vancouver to talk about to generate a format? And, you know, I kind of laughed, because there is so much going on in the city of Vancouver, in the 26 communities or neighborhoods that make up our city. My greater fear was that we would leave somebody out, you know, and it still is, because there's some great stories and lots of neat things going on in those neighborhoods. So, no, I think we're fine.
I was going to say, Mike McCardle on TV's made a living out of exploring all those little neighborhoods, and every day there's a unique story.
Yeah, there's, you know, I mean, every day we're amazed at, you know, the 15 or 20 some odd people that come through our studios and talk to us about what's going on, whether it's a new author, whether it's a new painter, whether it's a new singer, whether it's a politician, whether it's a community group doing some really good work in the streets. I mean, there's a lot going on, and, you know, I think it's incumbent and necessary to share those stories.
I know at 98.3 you have a limited signal, but what about all the other platforms that Roundhouse gets out on?
You know, two good questions, and the first is, you know, is having a low power signal that just reaches the city of Vancouver a liability, or is it a gift? And I tend to look at it as a gift, because our focus is the city of Vancouver. Our footprint really goes from North Vancouver, maybe halfway through Richmond, and we go from UBC to, say, SFU or BCIT. So, you know, that's about 1 million people, and we know that the signal goes beyond that a little bit, and that there's some pockets that are better than others. So, you know, so that it kind of allows us to focus on that footprint, and that footprint is the city of Vancouver. So unlike most stations who reach all of the lower mainland, you know, they have to dilute, or they have to, you know, water down their content to be more generic to suit a lower mainland audience, where our content is very local. You know, we're about 70% local, where most stations are about 30% local. And when I say local, again, I mean city of Vancouver. So, you know, is it a gift, or is it a strength or weakness? And I guess you could argue both sides of that, but, you know, frankly, I think it's a real strength.
Well, most places in Canada are 1 million people or less, so what you have is a typical major Canadian city to program to.
Yeah, well, I mean, our audience is still bigger than Winnipeg's. So, you know, the challenge for us is just time. You know, it takes it usually takes 3 to 5 years to build a radio station, and we've been at this for 1.5 years. We had a long delay in building and getting approval and getting on the air. And so we're still learning our way. You know, we're still developing different programming. We're still changing things. We're still finding new ways of doing things better. You know, we've just relaunched our second website. We're changing our social media platforms. We're archiving all of our content so that it's streamable and that it's digestible online, you know, at your leisure. So no, it's been a really fun process, but it's a lot of work.
We'll have more with Don Shafer right after the break.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN AF. surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines. Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Don Shafer. He's the general manager of Roundhouse Radio in Vancouver. Don, can you give us a little bit of your background? Yes, you've been in the radio business for a long time. Where did you start, and why the hell did you get into a business that likes to eat its young?
You know, it's funny. Well, again, the eating the young part's not funny, but you know, when I was a kid growing up in Pittsburgh, you know, I used to lay underneath the covers when my parents thought I was asleep, and I'd listen to the Skip, or in those days it was AM radio, and I'd listen to these crazy radio stations all over North America, including Chum FM and stations out of New York and Detroit and Buffalo and, you know, Atlanta. And I was always amazed by the magic that came out of that box. And I've always been a fan. I've always been struck, and, you know, I thought, geez, one day I'd really like to be able to do that. And, you know, I started bumming around radio stations and going for coffee and hamburgers and teletype copy or whatever the professionals needed. And eventually, you know, somebody didn't show up for work one day and I was on the air. And I guess, you know, in many ways I never looked back. And I was fortunate enough to come to Montreal in the late 60s and work at a radio station called Shome. And for me, I guess that was really, you know, a foundational moment for me, because I learned a lot about music, about classic rock, about programming, and worked my way across Canada. So I've worked at Shome in Montreal, Chum FM in Toronto, Q107 in Toronto, and in some great rock stations, and settled in Vancouver, where I helped put together a couple of stations. One's called C Fox and one was called Rock 101. So I mean, Canada is home. All my kids were born here, and you know, I've had the privilege to work with some wonderful broadcasters that didn't eat their young, that were very gracious in training a young kid. And you know, I just love what this medium can do. I think when it's really on, really engaged, and really focused, and really knows its audience, it's just a wonderful medium. When it's automated and sleepy, you know, I'm not so sure.
Well, that would happen to be most radio stations now. If a disaster happens, they have no one live there to tell you, get out of North Van, you know, it's about to disappear in a landslide. Or to tell you about Michael Jackson dying.
Yeah.
Is that something that you like about your radio station? You have people there who can talk about something that's going on right now, not...
Well, you know, to be honest with you, we're in the same boat as most radio stations are, where, you know, cost and operating are challenging. So we are live, you know, when we need to be live, and until, you know, times change, you know, we'll probably still be automated overnight. So we still, you know, we still do what they call jukebox overnight.
Well, nothing wrong about that, but what I'm saying, during the day...
I'd rather be live. You know, yeah. I'd rather be live 24/7, and that's certainly our goal, to be live and to be available. I mean, I think that's the magic of radio. So hopefully one day we'll get there.
What about this trend where everything is programmed out of New York and Toronto, and they expect every Canadian city or American city to listen to the same things, the same talk, the same music?
Yeah, I don't really have much of a comment. I mean, it's not. I mean, I understand why stations do it. I understand why chains do it. It reduces cost, but it also sucks the soul out of a local radio station and takes the heart out of the staff that work in it. So, you know, I understand why it's done. You know, because it's a chain. It's essentially a chain retail model, but it doesn't really make that local radio station special.
We'll have more with Don Shafer right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario. With grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold, a drill program will commence this spring to test the numerous targets located by recent groundwork. For more information, visit our website, rmroyalty.com.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Don Shafer. Don, what was the biggest challenge putting Roundhouse Radio on the air?
Well, there have been so many of them. It's hard to say which was the toughest. Writing the application was challenging because it's a really in-depth process, as you know, in terms of doing the research, finding the frequency, writing the proposal, bringing in all the consultants and people that need to support the application. So that was quite challenging, but I felt like we had a really good idea to reach a local audience, which was unique. Probably the tougher challenge was working with the city to find a new transmitter location for us, and that delayed us going on the air by about 9 months, which was really frustrating. But thankfully, we eventually found one. And then, of course, there's all the other things that go with it. When you're a large company and you've got lots of resources, you can draw on those resources. When you're a standalone, little company like ours, owned by, 4 families in British Columbia, you don't have those resources or infrastructure to rely on, so we had to build everything from scratch. So whether it's accounting or whether it's wiring or whether it's, building a news team or whether it's finding a music library, none of those resources were available to us. So building out all of that infrastructure that goes into a radio station, and I point out there are lots of moving parts in a radio station, it was really cumbersome. And then to teach people how to use it or how to establish workflow and a work pattern and dare I say teamwork, is not something you do overnight. So it's a long, arduous process.
Don, you've hired some familiar names, some big names. Who are the staff that we should really be listening to, and why do you like them so much?
We intentionally hired people with experience and a lot of people that did not come from radio, specifically because we wanted different voices and different perspectives than just the same old. And it's really funny because even some of the older folks like myself that are here that are fairly traditional broadcasters integrated well with most of the younger people and most of their ideas, and so we've learned to grow with each other's help, how to tackle the modern world in a very old medium. So it's been a real joy to watch those conversations grow and to watch the station grow with it.
Is live streaming along with video cameras part of the process?
It's just, it's using the technology that we have. One of the questions that was asked to me is, why would you build an over-the-air radio station? Why wouldn't you just be online? And, it's a lot easier to start with an over-the-air radio station knowing that probably eventually we will be an online radio station. I mean, 10 years, I don't know whether there'll be any over-the-air radio stations. There may be, but, popular opinion would let us seem that it's going to be an internet world and that streaming will be, the primary source of broadcasting a radio station. Webcams and streaming audio or video, just seems to me a natural part of what we do. I still think that the internet's probably the best thing that ever happened to radio because it gave it the ability to be able to use more than just one platform. We have multiple platforms, and I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we know how to use them really well.
Don, when you're looking at all the new technology, cars now don't have AM radios. Some will probably have FM. What do you envision for the future for broadcasting?
I don't know that I'm hung up on the platform as much as I'm hung up on, having relevant programming that reaches an audience. And I think if you have great content, and whether it's music or whether it's spoken word, if you have great content that reaches the heart and soul of your audience, that regardless of how you do it, they'll find you. And I think the content of the programming is more important than whether it's on AM or FM or whether it's streaming on the internet.
Don, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim. It's been a real pleasure. It's nice to catch up.
My guest has been Don Shafer, General Manager of Roundhouse Radio, 98.3 FM in Vancouver. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our very popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. If you have any questions for the show or for our guests, they can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.